Not to be missed.
The CD-ROM. To some, an outdated relic of a bygone era, but to others, it's regarded as one of the most important technological advancements in the age of personal computers. This handheld disk didn't just replace the aging 3.5-inch floppy, it revolutionized the worlds of storage, distribution, and entertainment. Building on the technology used in the older Laserdisc format, the CD-ROM soon became a universal standard, a durable, portable, and deceptively powerful piece of optical storage. While the floppy disk maxed out at a measly 1.4 megabytes, CDs offered a staggering 700. What would we ever do with that much space? But the CD was more than just a storage method. It was the key to a whole new creative world. Full motion video, photorealistic graphics, and voice acting weren't just for the arcades anymore. These newly broadened artistic possibilities led to many a breakthrough in the world of game development. Quirky, experimental, and often bizarre, these discs were sure to stick in the memory of all who played them. With software tools such as Apple's HyperCard and Macromedia's Director, the barrier to creating a piece of interactive PC software was lowered for the first time. While previously you needed years of coding experience to simply render a few sprites, these no or low-code alternatives would open the gates for a whole new generation of artists. Painters, filmmakers, musicians, educators, and more. Creating computer programs wasn't just for the nerds anymore. But not every CD-ROM was a video game. Some are simply multimedia experiences, deserving of a different label entirely. Therefore, we'll call them interactive CD-ROMs.
It's an interactive CD-ROM!
Some of the most well-known interactive CD-ROMs include digital encyclopedias, such as Microsoft's Encarta or DK's Dinosaur Hunter. While this looks primitive through a modern lens, this was so realistic it traumatized an entire generation. Even some of your favorite musicians experimented with the new format. In 1994, the artist formerly known as Prince released a CD-ROM of his own. Take a virtual reality tour of Paisley Park, listening to some of Prince's greatest hits, all from the comfort of your own home. While an interactive CD-ROM may have video game elements, they typically had enough key differences to warrant a label of their own, but generally they meet most of the following criteria. They're generally non-linear, abstract, exploration-based experiences. They're controlled almost entirely by the mouse, they have little to no reaction or timing-based elements, they have a heavy focus on artistic aspects, especially visuals and music, they use pre-rendered 3D graphics or full-motion video instead of the real-time drawing of sprites or models, and lastly, they're usually made with Macromedia Director or another tool not originally intended for video games. And while it's not a requirement, it's a common theme that these titles are wildly experimental, featuring some truly creative uses of the new technology. In short, an interactive CD-ROM is a subgenre of digital entertainment, adjacent to video games, but in a category of their own. To further demonstrate just how special these discs are, I've selected 3 prime examples to share with you all today. I'm John, and thanks again for joining me on another deep dive through the wacky and weird world of 90s computer entertainment. Venetian Deer is a multimedia interactive CD-ROM created by the underground German art group known as Die Veteranen. Released in 1997, this title is easily the most obscure of the 3 I'll discuss today. Click, create, communicate reads the subtitle on the CD's jewel case, a vague call to action, juxtaposed by an avant-garde rendering of a deer in a Venetian mask. Flip to the backside and you'll find a track list. Yes, this is also a music album, featuring 12 tracks from the groups Stock, Hausen, and Walkman. Little information can be found online regarding either of the parties involved. Regarding Die Veteranen, it seems that they were a German experimental art group which primarily made multimedia projects. Aside from Venetian Deer, they created one other interactive CD-ROM, but it seems that that's become a piece of lost media. Stockhausen and Walkman, on the other hand, were an experimental electronic music group active in the 90s. Their music is primarily sample-based, featuring interesting sound collages created using snippets from a wide range of sources. Venetian Deer saw the 2 parties join forces to create something certifiably unique, using a medium that, at the time, seemed like the future. Why limit albums to just an audio component? With the power of the CD-ROM, you can put the album in your PC and take the experience to a whole new level. what an experience it is. Upon launching Deer.exe, we're greeted with a title screen featuring 2 deer heads. Clicking one takes us to some sort of a swimming pool with a crane grabbing strange items from the water every few seconds. We are given no introduction, no direction, and there's no clear goal. So I decide to click on the object held by the crane, which was a photograph of a human eye, and am whisked away to an entirely different screen. A 4x4 square composed of eyes. As I move my mouse across the screen, their gaze follows the cursor. The audio consists of a single drum loop that's about half a second long, and it repeats endlessly. There's nothing else to interact with except for 3 lines in the bottom right. Clicking this brings us to a new scene, something that appears to be a sewer. I click again to find myself jump scared by the sudden appearance of a highly compressed image of a dog. The volume of the music has increased tenfold, introducing a chaotic cacophony of drum sounds. Clicking the dog's mouth reveals a sphere, which brings us to, well, I can't really describe this one. This is Venetian Deer in a nutshell. It's an interactive piece of Dada art, assembled with both immense creativity and a wild disregard for cohesion. In total, there are about 20 different screens you can visit, some more interactive than others. These screens fall into one of 2 categories, transition screens or activity screens. The transition rooms are nothing more than crudely drawn backgrounds that serve as pathways to the activities. And the activities themselves vary wildly in both theme and quality, but they always include some sort of visual or audio component. Due to their abstract nature, it's rather difficult to describe them, so how about I just show you a few?
Hot. Hot. Hot.
Hint.
Hot.
They're not all this confusing, though. There are a few that are more straightforward music sequencers. Well, if you can even call them that. One of them, called The Machine and You, allows you to click on various images, triggering a call and response music session, although it's lacking in any discernible melody. Another features a pachinko-like machine that drops balls onto multiple rows of triangles, triggering sounds on impact. This next one is one of my favorites. It's a sequencer that, instead of using traditional notes or chords, allows you to place a variety of directional arrows. As the playhead encounters an arrow, a different sound is triggered depending on the arrow's color and direction. There's also a mode that hides the UI, allowing you to watch the arrows flash on screen. Mesmerizing. They even thought to include a save button. The disc's packaging references a Venetian Deer website where you can share your creations with the world. Unsurprisingly, it no longer exists. But this is essentially all that Venetian Deer has to offer. It's pretty much impossible to put this experience into words, so if this looks at all interesting, I recommend you give it a try. A download of the disc image can be found online rather easily. While it strays a bit into the left field, I think it's pretty cool. It's an interactive art exhibit, a view into the unknown, and without the thankless efforts of media preservationists, it would have been lost forever. Osamu Sato is the definition of a multimedia artist. Over his decades-long career, he's played the role of composer, photographer, digital artist, and even video game designer. Outside of his home country of Japan, he's best known as the brains behind the surreal PS1 game, LSD Dream Emulator. But LSD wasn't Sato's first foray into the world of video games. In fact, it was his fifth. Although, according to the man himself, he wouldn't really consider any of his works to be video games at all. He's actually expressed that he's not a fan of video games in any form, once describing them as something reserved for otaku, or geeks. Instead, he sees his creations as CD-ROM art, with the PlayStation or computer as his canvas. Nonetheless, Osamu Sato would enter the world of interactive CD-ROMs in 1994 with his first release, Eastern Mind: The Lost Souls of Tong-Nou. Surprisingly, it would also receive a US localization, being the first and only of Sato's works to officially leave Japan. The game, as it's called on the box, received mixed reviews from American critics. Many were confused, yet captivated by its psychedelic and surreal nature, although a common complaint was that it wasn't much of a game, more of an artistic adventure. Labeling this a game seems like a failure on the publisher's part. I wonder if it would have been more successful if it was marketed like the artwork it is, instead of as a traditional video game. Due to the obscure and experimental nature of the work, sales were very poor, leading copies to become exceedingly rare and expensive. But thanks to the magic of the internet, we don't have to worry about that. Our journey into Tong-Nou immediately takes a turn for the weird. A variety of strange creatures composed of simple geometric shapes morph before our eyes, all complemented by a pulsing electronic beat. Once you've seen enough, click to continue to the introductory cutscene. You are Rin, and one day you wake up to find that your soul is missing. This is the cruel doing of the living island Tong-Nou, which devours a random human soul once per year out of sheer boredom. Without a soul, the human will wither and die, robbed of their core being. But Rin isn't one to give up, and decides to head to Tong-Nou to recover their soul. Rin needs a soul to survive, so in the meantime, they borrow one from a man named Yashiro, extending their life for 49 days. This is the first of many times that Eastern Mind makes direct references to Buddhism. According to the practice, it's believed that when death occurs, a soul is held for 49 days before being reborn. But without a new soul, Rin will never find rebirth, and so they arrive on Tong-Nou prepared to do whatever it takes to reclaim their original soul. Tong-Nou, the living island, is played by Osamu Sato himself. His bald, green head can be rotated and interacted with, revealing the branching pathways for us to take on our journey. Movement is controlled by clicking whenever the cursor shows an arrow, taking you in that direction. Each screen is represented by a pre-rendered 3D image, similar to Myst. On many screens, you will encounter one of the residents of Tong-Nou. Most will offer some sort of dialogue, ranging from important hints to bizarre non-sequiturs. While Sato doesn't personally call this title a game, it does still have a clear ending, and there's a certain path you must take to reach it. However, this journey will be different for everyone, since there's no strict order in which the main quest is completed. But there is one thing that everyone must do in Tong-Nou: die. There are a variety of ways you can do this, but personally, my first death was caused by touching the fire inside of the island's right cheek. You breathed your last, but do not fear death. From now, you will acquire 9 lives. Eventually, you will discover your own self for the first time. With Rin's borrowed soul leaving their dying body, we're given one final guiding message: acquire 5 Magatamas and recover our original soul. We're then given Rin's nameplate, an item with an unknown purpose. This is the first of our many deaths on Tong-Nou. Every time you die, you're prompted to choose one of each: an eye, a nose, and a mouth. These facial features combine to determine which character you'll be reborn as. Each of these has a specific goal in life, told to you as part of their introduction. My first choice of facial features resulted in the birth of Kai, protector of the Candle of Life. As I'm born, I awaken at the foot of the Tree of Life. This is the centerpiece of Tong-Nou, where all life stems from. The roots of the tree sprout new life every second, representing the endless cycle of death and rebirth. My first task is to visit the King of Time in the Land of Time. The Tree of Life kindly helps me out a bit and teleports me straight there. Alright, we're on our own again. But let's take a step back and return to the face of Tong-Nou. Before I died, I entered the cheek of Tong-Nou, where I found the Tong-Nou book. This is a very helpful hint book, offering some interesting backstory on the world's characters and lore. It also features a description of each of the items you might find throughout the game. These items are stored inside the furoshiki, a traditional Japanese cloth sack that acts as our inventory. But don't worry, you never lose any items when you die. This further alleviates the fear of the unknown, and it encourages the player to explore and interact with as much as possible. Right out the gate, it appears that there are 5 main locations you can travel to. The right ear of Tong-Nou contains the Land of Life, where the Tree of Life is and where we were born. The left ear will take you down a winding cave, where 5 red orbs can be encountered. If you select the correct orb, you'll be teleported to the Land of Desire. Pick the wrong one, and you'll be crushed by a giant sphere. I already mentioned the right cheek, but this is where the Tong-Nou book and the Wall of Fire are encountered. The left cheek contains a portal to the Land of Dreaming, a watery world with crystalline structures. And finally, on the top of Tong-Nou lies Tong-Nou Central Mountain. But there's nothing you can do here right now, and the only way up is blocked by a gate. But if you've been paying attention, you might notice the 9 seals on the gate. One of these matches Rin's nameplate, which you received for dying. This immediately clues us in to our first overarching goal. Collect 9 nameplates and enter Tong-Nou Mountain, where Rin's soul is held in captivity. Time to get to work. I've got some lives to live. But first, I want to point out the fantastic soundtrack that we've been listening to. The entirety of Eastern Mind's soundtrack was composed by Osamu Sato himself. It's an eclectic mix, ranging from standard EDM to funky breakbeats to ambient industrial horror. But this soundtrack isn't just for the vibes, it plays an important part of the story. Different tracks are associated with different characters, new areas, or even hidden secrets. If you notice the music suddenly changing from one screen to another, it probably means there's something important nearby. This is just one of the ways that Eastern Mind shows its brilliance in puzzle design. At a first glance, none of this world makes any sense. The characters speak in riddles and the goals are unclear. No matter which path I take, I always run into a dead end. But take a step back and distance yourself from your preconceived notions. Don't try and play this like a traditional video game. Instead, you need to get lost and fully immerse yourself in the world. Accept the fact that you will be confused and let your curiosity take hold. Eventually, it'll all click. Everything is here for a reason. It's not just weird for the sake of it. Follow your curiosity. This mindset led to me getting crushed by a boulder. So much for fulfilling my destiny. In my new life, I am born as Retsu, a tiny little insect. My life ends almost immediately as I'm plucked from the ground and devoured. Apparently, this was my destiny, and the successful conclusion of my life rewards me with the second nameplate. Awesome, we're making progress. I am then reborn as Tao. I am the Registrar of Souls, and I work for the King of Life. I need to catalog all new life born from the tree, and to do that, I need to use the computer in the Land of Time. The newest creations in need of cataloging are myself and the 4 Zalgeros in the forest. Go get their names and put them in the computer. Sounds simple enough. By this point, you've probably spent about an hour just wandering around the world, so you should have a pretty good idea how you need to complete the king's task. The 4 creatures in the forest are some of the first that I ever encountered, although in my previous life, they never wanted to talk to me. I also remember accidentally getting sent to the Land of Time last time I tried to kill myself in the Wall of Fire. The second fire from the left is actually a secret portal. Yeah, it seems kind of obscure, but remember, just embrace the exploration and click on everything. I promise you, it'll start to make sense. Thanks to my newfound government credentials, the Zalgeros finally spill the beans and reveal their names. With these names written down on a piece of paper, I return to the Land of Time and climb the tower in the center. At the top, there's a computer room, but the keyboard is written in Tong-Nou script. I can't read this. Lucky for me, I happened to stumble upon a pair of magical glasses during one of my previous lives. Believe it or not, those were also in the fire. But this is actually a good example of the general puzzle design philosophy in Eastern Mind. At first, you're directionless and confused, but if you just keep wandering, you'll naturally end up encountering the firewall. And what do you do when you see something you can interact with? You click on it. Doing this will either teleport you to the Land of Time, give you the glasses, or kill you, depending on which flame you clicked. Let's say you chose the left one first. This brings you to the Land of Time. Logically, you're now curious as to what happens when you click the right one. It kills you. Okay, so what about the middle? This gives you the glasses. Trial and error is rewarded, and since death has no real penalty, there's no reason to fear it. A very Buddhist mindset. In all fairness, you could just as easily argue that this is terrible puzzle design. The solution is just to click on everything in sight. How is that logical or fun? But don't forget, this isn't really supposed to be a video game. It's a journey through the creative mind of Osamu Sato, a virtual tour through the Buddhist cycle of life and death. It's not supposed to challenge and stump the player just for the sake of padding the runtime. You're not supposed to get stuck, but it's also not overly easy. Going back to the glasses, I found those in the fire. But what do they do? No need to guess, because we can look inside of the Tong-Nou book that we found earlier. It clearly says that the glasses are used to read the Tong-Nou script, entirely different than the brain-busting moon logic of most games of the early 90s, but it's still rewarding once you figure it out. Besides, if I wanted to pull my hair out in frustration, I'd go play Gabriel Knight. Anyway, once you return to the tower, use the glasses, and log the 5 names in the computer, a registration card is printed. Return to the king, and he thanks us for our service. With our purpose fulfilled, we die, granting us our 3rd nameplate. Tao's life was one of the simpler ones, and Sha, my next choice, has a more complex task. As the Keeper of Music, I need to retrieve 4 special instruments scattered across the world. While technically you need to fulfill 9 lives to get the nameplates and unlock the seal, some characters have exceedingly straightforward lives. Rin, who you start as, only requires you to die in any manner. Jin, the failed creation, dies immediately after being born, fulfilling their purpose. Retsu, the ant, is eaten after a minute of being alive. Gyao is a flying fireball, whose life consists of a single cutscene ending in their sacrifice. Zen is the guardian of the land of dreaming, living inside of an ice wall. They can't move at all, only look left or right. After a few seconds, an intruder will come and stomp on you, instantly killing you and fulfilling your destiny. This means that there are only 4 real playable stories to complete. Tao must collect the names, Kai has to extinguish the flame, Sha has to get the instruments, and Biao has to fetch a new eyeball for the King of Dreaming. But don't forget, we still need to collect the 5 Magatama as well. These are hidden throughout the world, although they're all in places that you'd naturally encounter while completing the other tasks. Once you've fulfilled all 9 lives, take a moment to explore one last time. Aside from the places that are required for the main 4 quests, there's a few additional optional areas. Of particular note is the Helix Tower, which can be found within the Land of Desire. Each floor contains a room stranger than the last, including the Room of Sexual Desire. Careful, no touching, otherwise you'll contract an STD and die. With the 9 nameplates and 5 Magatamas in hand, it's time to climb Tong-Nou and reclaim our soul. But before we do that, we gotta do one more world-spanning fetch quest. Travel around the world and speak to those 5 engravings that give you hints. This will allow you to charge an elemental katana, which you need to free your soul. Once you've met them all and charged the katana of 5 forces, you're finally ready. Climb to the top of Tong-Nou and enter the shrine, and trigger the ending sequence. The King of Tong-Nou is freed, along with your soul. With his freedom, he shares the true story of Tong-Nou. In an act of rebellion, the King of Tong-Nou was locked at the mountaintop. The other kings of the island corrupted the land, twisting its purpose. Tong-Nou is not intended to devour souls, it should purify them. With the king's freedom, Tong-Nou is restored to its original purpose, a land of purgation, and Rin's soul returns to their body. And with that, the credits roll. Included is a lengthy monologue describing the world of Tong-Nou and the infinite cycle of rebirth that the souls experience. Life is not a beginning, and death is not an end. These are just different steps on the never-ending journey of our souls. It's a satisfying ending, bringing everything back to the core Buddhist themes that this work was based on. All in all, an average playthrough of Eastern Mind should take about 3 hours. But most importantly, was this a fun experience? In a way, it was, but it wasn't fun in a dopamine triggering way. It was more so fulfilling, satisfying, exactly like spending a day at the art museum. My patience was challenged, and my curiosity was rewarded. I can see why this was easily labeled as something other than a video game. This is exactly the type of fearless experimentation that brought the art of gaming to where it is today. Not everything needs to adhere to a certain label. You can actually just make whatever you want, as long as you're passionate about it. While Eastern Mind runs a risk of being completely forgotten due to its obscurity and lack of support from modern hardware, it's an important piece in the history of multimedia entertainment. It's truly something that never would have been made possible without the power of the CD-ROM and the easy-to-use Macromedia Director. Whether you call this an interactive CD-ROM, a piece of art, or a video game, it doesn't really matter. The experience speaks for itself. And for anyone who was lucky enough to find this 30 years ago, I'm sure it's something they'd never forget. For our third and final piece of interactive CD-ROM entertainment, we're taking a turn into something dark and twisted. This next title features several disturbing topics and images, so consider yourself warned. The Residents are one of the most prolific and longest-standing multimedia art collectives of the modern age. Originally founded in 1969, this semi-anonymous group has been credited with creating hundreds of pieces of art, including DVDs, musical albums, videos, short films, and more. Despite their longevity, they've never really broken into the mainstream, and I wouldn't be surprised if you've never heard of them. Due to the experimental nature of their work, they're not exactly a household name. I'm not entirely sure how I first heard about the Residents, but I've been familiar with their work for most of my life. As such, I'm no stranger to the avant-garde nature of their music and art. However, I understand that they're not for everyone, and there's a reason why they're still tremendously obscure after more than 50 years of operation. But the Residents themselves are a topic far too deep for the scope of this video. What's relevant here is their work in the field of interactive CD-ROMs. Bad Day on the Midway is the second and most successful CD-ROM released by the Residents. Released in late 1995, this piece intends to be an immersive storytelling experience, building a disturbing world unlike anything that had been seen before. Something like this was only possible due to the collaboration with publisher Inkscape, known for their innovative and surreal work on games such as Drowned God and The Dark Eye. Compared to the typical point-and-click adventure games of the time, Bad Day on the Midway has almost nothing in common. There are no real puzzles, the story is disjointed and almost nonsensical, the gameplay is non-linear, and nearly every aspect is randomized. This means that every playthrough will be unique, and unfortunately, this also means that sometimes you will get a game over to no fault of your own. Launching the program brings us to an impressively animated introductory cutscene featuring a fly-through of a dilapidated midway. For my non-American viewers, a midway is the area of a state fair or circus where you'd find carnival games and rides. We're then introduced to our main character, a 10-year-old boy named Timmy.
Wow, what a cool place!
The first thing you'll notice is this sort of word cloud below our main gameplay window. This represents the thoughts of our character, with sentences appearing in disjointed fragments. These thoughts aren't random though, and they specifically reference your character's current situation. You'll also find that they give you hints on what you should do next. Movement, again, is controlled in a similar manner to Myst, using a first-person perspective with pre-rendered backgrounds. Since your movement is locked to these pre-rendered scenes, you're forced to deal with whatever artistic framing is chosen for you. This can result in some rather disorienting moments, as nearly every shot is taken using a Dutch angle. Directly in front of us sits a robotic fortune teller. It's not exactly suited for its purpose, though. It just spews garbled idioms that make no sense at all.
A sleeping dog is the spice of life.
As you explore the decrepit midway, you'll soon notice a clock in the top left corner, indicating the passage of time. This is the first of many random events in Bad Day. Yes, even time passes at random. Whenever you move to a different screen, there's a percentage chance that time will pass. Certain events are more likely to happen later on in the day, and when the clock strikes midnight, the midway closes, ending the game. But we'll talk more about that later. Let's get back to exploring. First up, I decided to check out the warehouse directly in front of the midway entrance. Uh-oh, a creepy building full of props and animatronics. Am I about to get jump scared? The eerie music and ambient sounds of crashing metal sure don't help alleviate those fears. And after just a few steps, I'm startled by a strange man who jumps out from behind one of the props.
Psst. Timmy, come here.
But he's no threat. Instead, he just wants to tell us a story.
I'm going to tell you a story, Timmy. All about a poor, sad little boy. The little boy always said that the first thing he ever remembered seeing was a pair of cowboy boots. In his memory, those boots were attached to legs that somehow stretched upwards into an unknown infinity inhabited by the rest of his father. Although the boy quickly grew to despise this giant father, there was one thing about him that he liked in spite of its cold-hearted appearance: his father's butterfly collection. Although he loved the collection, he thought that things of beauty should never be killed, and he hated watching as his father pierced the struggling insects. The sad boy loved all beauty and believed that ugliness indicated the presence of death. He was 3 years old when he committed his first act of ugly liberation, the process which he used to release pain and free ugliness trapped inside of living creatures. He was playing alone outside of his mother's cabin when he found a baby bird struggling on the ground. The bird's eye had been penetrated by a sharp bone protruding out through the skin of its badly broken wing. It was the ugliest thing the sad little boy had ever seen, and he immediately picked up a large rock and crushed the helpless creature. In an ironic memorial to his despised departed father, the boy collected bits of hair, of bones, skin, and other artifacts from these incidents and shaped them to look like butterflies. I still see that sad little boy around here sometimes, Timmy. He deeply frightens me. But I don't think you have anything to worry about. He tells me that he still collects butterflies, though.
Well, that was disturbing. But more important than that, this artwork is just fantastic. The gruesome imagery paired with the grim story just fills me with dread. It might not be everyone's cup of tea, but I love this sort of stuff. This strange dude is named Ted, and he's one of the 7 playable characters you'll find in Bad Day on the Midway. As you travel between the different screens of the Midway, you'll encounter these characters at random. After a brief exchange of dialogue, you'll have the ability to click on them, indicated by your cursor changing to an eyeball. This will allow you to jump into their body, assuming their perspective. It's a unique mechanic, although I wish the differences between the characters were made a bit clearer. There are a few different rooms that some characters can't enter, but there's no real rhyme or reason as to who can do what. It honestly just feels completely random, and whenever I couldn't access a room, I never knew if it was because of my current character, or the time of day, or maybe some other unknown factor. But this is an interactive CD-ROM, so don't expect video game logic to apply. Just keep exploring, and all of your questions will get answered, right? Let's take a moment and analyze our surroundings. The art style here is certifiably unique, and honestly, quite good. The backgrounds are all highly detailed, for the time, created as pre-rendered 3D sets as opposed to something rendered in real time. The characters you'll encounter are then placed in front of these backgrounds, and they all have a distinct and disturbing appearance. Their animations are stiff, almost robotic, and their faces contort and twist in an uncanny way as they speak. This is the result of a mixed media approach to character design. Their bodies are traditional 3D models, but the faces use real human eyes and mouths. The result is unnerving, to say the least. This style of animation is reminiscent of the ancient synchrovox technique used in low-budget cartoons from the 1950s. It's also the first time I've ever seen it used in conjunction with 3D, and I gotta say, it looks awesome. The low resolution and limited color palette helps further the creepy vibe, although that was more of a required limitation than an artistic choice. Nonetheless, it's a great example of atmospheric horror, giving you the chills without relying on jump scares. But the visuals alone don't make the atmosphere, and the audio is worth commending as well. Every character is fully voice acted, and most of them aren't half bad. And most importantly, the music. The residents are no strangers to surreal, creepy music, intentional or otherwise. The main theme of Bad Day features a marching-esque beat, overlapped by detuned and off-tempo stabs that constantly wander and deviate from any established key. In a drunken fashion, a crash cymbal is played on almost the one of each measure, but sometimes it's a bit too early, throwing the entire thing off. This weird vibe is carried through each of the game's 12 tracks. A variety of circus-themed motifs and instruments can be heard on most songs, but they often devolve into distorted, corrupted melodies, lacking any discernible key or rhythm. It does a great job telling the story of a rundown Midway, the husk of something once great. The soundtrack is more than competent enough to stand on its own, and it received a standalone release. Returning to the strange scene that unfolded in the warehouse, I gather my bearings and step outside, returning to the corridors of the Midway. And just a few moments later, I encounter the next member of the cast, Dixie, the failed country singer. Prompted with the eyeball cursor mentioned earlier, I click on her body and assume control, watching as our perspective switches. This is also the primary gameplay loop of Bad Day, if you can even call it that. Explore the Midway, find all 7 characters, and view the world through their perspectives. Retrace your steps and see if anything changed. Read their thoughts and learn about their backstory, and try to make whatever sense you can out of this strange scenario. Now playing as Dixie, I entered the nearby Kill-A-Kami shooting gallery. Inside, interacting with the gun shows us a short animation. This psychedelic visual depicts a colorful shooting range, featuring cartoon versions of communist figures such as Lenin, Stalin, or Castro. Unfortunately, there's nothing more than an animation to watch here. You don't actually get to kill any commies. But once I turn around to leave, I notice the door labeled private. Behind it lies a cobweb-filled bedroom, where a strange man wrapped head to toe in bandages lies motionless in bed. Suddenly, Timmy shows up out of nowhere. This triggers another cutscene, revealing the sad life of Dixie.
I ain't one to complain, but I done seen some hard times, honey. I'll tell you that for sure. You know, what I always really wanted to be was a country and western singer. Why, I think everything smart in the whole world's done been sung in a country song. But I guess it just ain't worked out for me to be singing none. There's always been men in my life, though. First there was my dad, and then there was my first boyfriend, Carlos. And of course now there's Ike. That's him over there in the coma. My daddy, he was a truck driver. Leastways, sometimes he was. He was a great father to me, and he always told me how successful and famous I was gonna be. But I don't think he liked them long, lonely nights on the road all by himself too much. Somehow, he always seemed to wind up in bed with a drink in his hand. He was fun to be around, but my mama wasn't none too happy about him not working so much. Not too long after he died, I met Carlos. He was a real musician, and I just knew my dreams were about to come true. We was together for a whole year, but it turned out to be a year of me sitting around the outside, looking in at him playing music. Leastways, till I found out I was gonna have a baby. I can't tell you how much I wanted that baby, Timmy, but I guess Carlos didn't share my feelings none. Very next day, he snuck out, and when he left, he knocked over an old guitar he bought for me. It was all he had ever done for my singing career, and he never got around to even tuning it. After I got up from my nap and seen he was gone, I ran out and tripped over that damn guitar and fell down the stairs and lost my baby. I was only 17, Timmy honey, so I had to move back in with my mom, who never had liked Carlos too much. A little later, a friend wanted to take me to this here mini golf course that everyone was talking about. And that's where I met Ike, my true love. He was the owner and well-known Nazi sympathizer. 2 weeks later, we was married. But now, as you can see, he is in a real bad coma, and I just don't know what I'm gonna do, Timmy.
The art style in this cutscene was drastically different than that of Ted's. It's an abstract, mixed media style. Everything looks like it was assembled from magazine clippings. But it's an intentional decision for each cutscene to have a unique art style. Each one was created by a different guest artist, making Bad Day on the Midway an ensemble work of sorts. Through these highly stylized cutscenes, we learn more about the 7 Midway residents. After watching Dixie's story, we learned that the man on the bed is her husband, Ike. And not only is he the owner of the Midway, he's also a proud Nazi sympathizer, and currently he's in a coma. We can interact with his body and get a peek into his brain, revealing his never-ending coma dream, a constant stream of visions of swastikas and Hitler. So this is what the Neuralink does to the brain. Anyway, across the street lies the Marvels of Mayhem, a lighthearted carousel journey through the histories of modern warfare. Viewer discretion advised.
Hi, I'm Ike, the owner of the Midway, and it's my pleasure to introduce you kiddies to the miracles of modern warfare.
It's clear that Ike is obsessed with war and violence, although we're never told if he himself has any military background. It's also made further apparent his appreciation for the Nazis, which Dixie seems to have absolutely no problem with. No wonder why nobody wants to come to the Midway. Look who's running it. Alright, next up, the rat racing booth. Here, we encounter Otto, who has perhaps the most annoying voice in the entire history of recorded audio.
Here it is, right on, the home of Oscar the racing rat. Bet on a rat, win a rat, right here, the home of Oscar the racing rat.
There's little to see here, aside from a small scene which shows Oscar the rat escaping. After this event occurs, Otto can be encountered several times throughout the Midway, begging for help finding his prized rat. But we'll ignore him for now, and head into the theater labeled Dagmar the Dog Woman. I guess this is supposed to be a burlesque show of sorts, but fortunately for this video's monetization, there's nothing too inappropriate going on here. Instead of an erotic show, Dagmar shares the tale of her troubled childhood and how she became obsessed with dogs.
It's all about bow wows. Bow wows and boys. And it all started with Daddy. Daddy, a bad cop who became a worse dog trainer. But then there was this guy, you see. There's always been at least one. And this guy followed the little princess home. Home, where Daddy was. Daddy in the safety of his big, strong arms. But Daddy wasn't there. Daddy was next door doing a little repair work for his best friend's wife. The sound of the little princess screaming eventually brought Daddy back, just in time to see the guy being greeted by one of Daddy's German shepherds. No thanks to Daddy, the little princess was saved, just like in all good fairy tales. But she never forgot. And who was the guy? He was just someone that Daddy met in a liquor store. And the princess never forgot the brave German shepherd that saved her life. Eventually, she grew up and got involved with men. Men like Huck and Chuck, the bumbling twin bodybuilders who fought for her affection, and eventually inspired the first of her many tattoos. A perfect pair of Dobermans, one on each thigh. And of course, there were more, lots more. But they all turned into dogs. And the dogs turned into tattoos. And the tattoos turn you on, don't they, boys? And wouldn't you all just love to become the bad bulldog on my belly?
If that show wasn't the blood-pumping experience you expected, don't worry, the Midway still has plenty left in store. Take a few steps down the lane and you'll encounter Torture's Top 10, a torture-themed dark ride. It's about as insane as it sounds. Forget about animatronics and catchy songs. This is nothing close to any dark ride you've seen before. This ride consists of nothing more than a cart that ferries riders between 10 television screens. Each one displays an artistic rendition of one of history's greatest torture methods. I haven't the slightest idea what some of these are supposed to be, but they sure are horrifying. Some highlights include marooned by mob inertia, or forced to carry cripples. I'm not exactly an expert on the history of torture methods, but I think they might have made these up. Regardless, if the gruesome animations aren't enough to freak you out, the blood-curdling screams certainly will. But just as soon as the ride ends, I find myself approached yet again by that strange man from earlier, Ted. Out of nowhere, he shoots me in the forehead with a dart, causing me to pass out. As I slip out of consciousness, Ted lectures me, calling me ugly, and then strangles me.
I can only envy your impending freedom. Goodbye, my friend. Goodbye.
Game over. What the hell? Okay, how was I supposed to avoid that? What's happening? This is where Bad Day really starts to show its more abstract design aspects. This attack felt like a completely random, unavoidable occurrence, because it is.
Excuse me.
And no matter how much you try, there's absolutely no way to predict them. But I'll embrace death. It's part of the experience after all. Let's start over. I continue my exploring efforts, switching perspectives as often as I can, retracing my steps and leaving no stone unturned. Eventually, I was able to enter the previously locked sperm whale giving birth to an electric eel exhibit. I have no idea what caused the door to open, maybe it was my character or the time of day, but regardless, I'm allowed in now. This deteriorating building features a life-size model of a sperm whale giving birth to an electric eel. But what's this inside one of the broken aquariums? It's Oscar the rat. And just like with the human characters, I can click on the rat to assume his perspective. Unfortunately, we don't actually get to play as him, and instead, we just get to watch a cutscene. This lucky rat, named Oscar, was saved from a river by Ike and Dixie. Struck by Oscar's startling red face, Ike immediately knew he had a star on his hands. Oscar would go on to become the biggest attraction at the struggling Midway, bringing in just enough guests to keep the business afloat. But Oscar hated the noisy and smelly humans, and he started to feel sick, a powerful sickness, one that he couldn't contain. The cutscene ends, and we regain control as Timmy. It's starting to get late now, and the clock is approaching midnight. What happens then? But just before we get that answered, I'm approached by a frantic Otto. Did he finally find Oscar?
Oscar! I need you, Oscar!
Oh, he just died, right in front of me. I take another step forward, and another member of the Midway appears. Same as Otto, they turn a sickly shade of red, scream in pain, and die. With every step, this scene repeats until I've witnessed everyone on the Midway's death. What is going on? Soon enough, the clock strikes midnight, and the Midway closes for the night. Everyone, except for Timmy, is dead.
Wow, what a great place. I have to come back here tomorrow.
Congratulations, you've achieved one of Bad Day on the Midway's multiple endings. Although it may not feel like it, the world doesn't revolve around you. While I was frolicking carelessly between exhibits as Timmy, the adults of the Midway succumbed to the bubonic plague. How did that happen? A few hours into each day, Oscar escapes from his home in the racing rat roulette. Otto will then begin his desperate but fruitless search. Whether you end up finding Oscar in the aquarium or elsewhere is completely random. But regardless of this, he will always go on a rampage at around 6 p.m. All of the Midway characters besides Timmy can get infected, and usually everyone gets sick. If you're playing as any of the adults, you'll know you've been bit when your characters begin having thoughts about feeling ill. Soon, the screen will start to turn red, and by then, it's already too late. This is supposed to be fun? What's the goal here? Wander around the Midway, watch creepy animations, and then die to something out of my control? Well, yes and no. It's part of the reason why I'm labeling this as an interactive CD-ROM in the first place. You're not here to play games. You're here to enjoy artwork and appreciate the effort that went into creating an immersive multimedia experience. You can't view this the same way that you would view a traditional video game. Bad Day on the Midway is something entirely different. But once you've seen all the attractions and watched each character's cutscene, you'll struggle to find any reason to stick around. Well, if you're clever enough, you might have noticed a common narrative throughout each of your lives. A few hours into the day, while playing as Dixie, you'll always get approached by a man from the IRS. The Midway is being audited, and he demands to see your tax returns. With her husband in a coma, Dixie is completely lost. That was Ike's job. She doesn't know where anything is. Is this a quest line I smell? Sort of. You can spend as much time as you like looking for those tax documents, but you'll never find them. Dixie's thoughts might even suggest different places to look, but they're all wrong. Do you really think Ike, of all people, is the type of guy to file taxes? If you're being thorough, you'll check every possible room in the Midway, including the control room on the second floor of the three-headed Yeti exhibit. I'd been here before, but last time there was nothing of interest, just a strange vat of acid and some themed books on a shelf. But when playing as Dixie, when we try and leave, we get approached by a fellow that we met earlier, named Jackie. Earlier in the day, he had approached Dixie asking for a job at the Midway. But suddenly, Jackie removes the disguise, revealing his true identity, Jocko. Who's Jocko?
You piece of puke! You're lowering a bug on the bottom of a grave robber's boot! You tried to kill my husband!
Now listen, Dixie. I was Ike's friend. Remember when I fixed that flat on his wheelchair?
Okay, so he tried to kill Ike and failed, and I guess that's why Ike is in a coma? I'm not sure how I'm supposed to react to this revelation. Am I supposed to feel sorry for Ike? He seems like a terrible person. But I guess Dixie doesn't care that much either, since she just lets Jocko wander off, never to be seen again. She's only worried about the tax documents right now. I've checked just about everywhere, with no luck. With only an hour before midnight, I head to the only place I haven't looked, the sperm whale exhibit. Suddenly, Dixie's thoughts began racing. The phrase sperm whale flashes repeatedly on the bottom of the screen. Get a bit closer, and you'll notice that the whale is cracked, allowing us to climb inside. What's this? The taxes? No. It's Ike's diary. Of course, we're going to read it. Ike's personal writings reveal that he's been living a lie for years. He's not in a coma at all. He just pretends to be in one so that Dixie stops bothering him all the time. She's too clingy, always wanting to spend time with him and have children. Basically, the worst wife that ever existed. Time to head back to Ike's room and give him a piece of our mind.
Oh, Ike! Ike, honey, I done found your diary in the tail of that whale, and I read about how you faked being paralyzed all these years 'cause you was scared of being too close on account of how I can be so clingy and grabby and wanting to have lots of babies and all. Ike! Ike! Oh, you're waking up, honey!
Oh, my head! My head!
It's only God's teardrops.
Ike, listen, honey. It's my song that I sent off to that record company, and they're playing it on the radio.
Radio! Radio! How much money did you get, Dixie? You didn't sign anything, did you?
Oh, I don't know, Ike, honey. You know I'm not so good with that business stuff. They did send me a bill or something in the mail a couple days ago. Here it is, honey.
It's a check, Dixie. Now we can leave this dump and build the brand new park that I've been dreaming about.
Oh, Ike, honey. Anything you want to do is okie dokie with me.
The best things in wives are free.
We're gonna go now, Timmy, honey, but you're gonna have to come see us in the brand new amusement park we're gonna build with all the money I made with my hit record.
Wow, cool, Miss Dixie. I hope I get to see her real soon.
I can see it all now, Dixie. Kitty Clan Country! We'll build it in Idaho. All the kids can put on white hoods and robes, and as soon as they enter the park, well, the first thing they'll see will be a huge Ferris wheel with a giant burning cross in the center. And we'll sell Grand Dragon dogs and huge Imperial Wizard burgers at the concession booth. Maybe even have cotton candy stand. It's gonna be great, Dixie.
I guess you could call this the good ending. Well, that was Bad Day on the Midway, for the most part. In total, there are 6 different endings, one for every character except Otto. However, seeing them all is a huge pain in the ass, thanks to the random death events. In order to trigger the other endings, you need to have a certain combination of characters survive until midnight. But since you have no control over who Ted murders or who Oscar bites, you're basically just rolling the dice. If you want to watch them all, you can find them here on YouTube, but most of them aren't that interesting or satisfying. But again, it's not about any specific ending or what little story there is to be found here. The joy of this experience comes from getting lost in the twisted, surreal, and highly stylized creation of The Residents. It's no wonder why this never made it into the mainstream. This sort of slow-paced, avant-garde style of experience had little appeal to the average gamer in the 1990s. But for those with more of a stomach for the strange and controversial, Bad Day on the Midway is possibly worth checking out. But it's hard to recommend playing it yourself, especially when you can get an arguably better experience just by watching a video playthrough. And even then, it's not like there's a good story that entices you to stick around to the end. All of the characters are either intentionally unlikable, straight up annoying, or otherwise unmemorable. However, this might be due to a missing piece of context, one which can only be found in the official Bad Day on the Midway companion novel, except for the fact that this novel was released in 2012, 17 years later. I grabbed a copy myself since it was free on Kindle Unlimited and gave it a read. As far as storytelling goes, this is a far better experience than you'll find on the CD. It expands on the backstories of the existing characters, as well as introducing a few new ones. It's basically a retelling of the events of the game, except with a more standard chronological format. It's actually not too bad, and it has a nice little intro section that tells a little bit about the story behind the CD's creation. Most notably, the author mentions that the residents were heavily inspired by a CD-ROM game released in 1991 called Spaceship Warlock.
My name is Stella. I'm pleased to meet you.
This one might be even weirder than any of the ones I play today. Might have to try it later. In addition to the novelization of Bad Day, there's also an official strategy guide, which apparently includes hundreds of full-color pictures and more behind-the-scenes info. However, this is exceedingly rare, and there's only one copy for sale on eBay at $100. But the story of Bad Day on the Midway goes even deeper than this, as apparently there were talks at one point to turn this into a TV show. Rumor has it that this would have been directed by none other than David Lynch. If true, that would have been amazing, especially if it had that same creepy animation style. So let's wrap up my thoughts on Bad Day on the Midway. If you're into weird, creepy 90s media, it's definitely worth trying, especially since it received an officially endorsed fan re-release that runs on modern systems. But it's not a very good game, nor does it tell a particularly compelling story. It's a piece of art, for better or worse, and everyone will walk away with a different opinion. All things considered, this is certainly one of, if not the most unique creations of the CD-ROM era, and for that reason alone, I think it's worth remembering. The interactive CD-ROM lived a short life, devoid of any significant fanfare or smash hits. Many of the titles that can be categorized as such offered strange, artistic experiences that didn't appeal to the mainstream audiences of the time. They also weren't exactly the most marketable pieces of media. While often sold alongside more traditional video games, and labeled as such, they sure did look boring next to the likes of Doom or Duke Nukem. With technology advancing at a breakneck pace, pre-rendered 3D graphics and full-motion video appeared dated only a few years after their introduction, and it certainly didn't help that the attempt to bring interactive CD-ROMs to home consoles resulted in the disastrous Philips CDI.
Good.
There just wasn't enough interest for this to be a commercially viable endeavor. These were too boring for gamers, and the people who might have been interested in them probably didn't have computers at all. For the most part, the interactive CD-ROM era only lasted about 6 years, beginning in 1991 and ending around 97. But the core principles and ideas found in these creative efforts didn't just disappear. They were absorbed by the overall gaming industry, opening the doors for genre-pushing experimental titles. The definition of a video game loosened, and with it, a whole new wave of innovative developers followed. CD-ROMs as a whole peaked in the year 2000, but as needs changed, so did the preferred method of optical storage. The DVD came onto the scene in '96, most notably pioneered by the incredibly popular PlayStation 2. This brought yet another leap in storage capacity, crushing the CD-ROM's 700 megabytes with a seemingly infinite 8 gigabytes. And to make things even worse for the CD-ROM came the widespread adoption of high-speed internet. This was the final nail in the coffin for the CD. It didn't help that the discs themselves are susceptible to degradation and don't make for great long-term storage. It wouldn't surprise me if some of you watching this have never even seen a CD in person. In the end, it's no wonder that these interactive CD-ROMs are so strange and incomparable. Their creators were paving the way for themselves without a clear guide to follow or a success story to chase. Instead of fitting into a genre mold, they just created. Who cares if it doesn't break sales records or even if it makes money at all? They're making art for the love of it, and that's always something worth commending. While the interactive CD-ROM is no more, it shouldn't be forgotten. Some of the most unique experiences in today's gaming can trace their roots back to the experimental risk-takers of the past. And I think it's important that, whenever possible, we preserve and share these works with the next generation, lest they get forgotten forever. And with that, I'll say my goodbyes. Thank you again for spending some time with me, exploring the lost art of the interactive CD-ROM. Have you played any of these three before? And if so, did they haunt your childhood? Or maybe you played another one that I didn't mention. Leave a comment with your thoughts. And as always, I'll see you next time. Goodbye.